Hello and welcome to Beyond the Badge. I'm your host, Middlesex Sheriff Peter Koutoujian. According to the most recent census data, over 350,000 Massachusetts residents are military veterans. Today we'll talk with two guests who are working each and every day to make sure the service of those veterans are recognized and resources are available to support them and their families. Representative John Lawn is a lifelong Watertown resident. He was elected to represent the 10th Middlesex District, my old district, in May of 2011, and was recently appointed as chairman of the legislature's Joint Committee on Veterans and Federal Affairs. Retired Brigadier General Jack Hammond is a native of Reading and has spent 30 years serving our country in the United States Army. A veteran of both Afghanistan and Iraq in 2011, he became the first Massachusetts officer to achieve the rank of general in a combat theater since World War II. Today, General Hammond is Executive Director of Home Base, a partnership between the Boston Red Sox and Mass General Hospital, whose sole focus is helping at-risk veterans and military families regain the lives they once had. I'm honored to be joined by both. Before we begin, I want to thank you both for your recent visits to the Middlesex Jail and House of Corrections. For our viewers who may not be aware, our facility is home to the Commonwealth's only dedicated unit for incarcerated military veterans. The Housing Unit for Military Veterans, or HUMV, is our attempt to help those who have served our country but have subsequently found themselves involved with the justice system. It's an initiative I hope we'll have a few minutes to speak about later in the show. So thank you very much for being here, gentlemen. And Chairman Lawn, you're chairman of a really important committee that affects the lives of hundreds of thousands of our constituents. Sometimes doesn't get the attention it needs, but impacts lives so significantly. Could you tell us a little bit about the committee and how it works?
Sure. First of all, thank you for having me on, and it is a pleasure to serve as chairman of the Joint Committee of Veterans and Federal Affairs. I also serve with Senator Rush, who is the Senate chair. So this committee, as you know from your time in the legislature, is tasked with keeping the veterans benefits of our residents of Massachusetts to the highest levels in the country. I think we are looked at as the kind of gold standard of veterans services across the United States. Everyone looks, we undoubtedly have the best services and take care of our veterans. So each term, we certainly, each election cycle, we certainly try to make sure that we continue to provide the benefits to our veterans. And there's also many different things that happen, unintended consequences of past legislation that we look at. For example, we have, we had increasing benefits for Gold Star families, and what we realized is when those would be calculated into like mass health or other benefits, and it would make people ineligible. So there's also things that we have to do to go back and make, corrections to past legislation. So that is the task of the committee, to make sure that we keep veterans benefits as the #1 priority in the country.
That must be a great thing to be able to go to work and know that you're doing something important like that every day.
It is, and we get to meet the general and many other people who work so diligently for our veterans across the state, and so it's a great group.
And General Hammond, thank you first for your service, but could you tell us a little bit about yourself? Because I know you've achieved significant things in your military career, but when we're speaking here, you're just a kid from Reading, local kid from Reading, and it's kind of really refreshing to see that come through. You tell us a little bit about yourself and some of your military career, perhaps?
Sure. It's funny, I, just as you said, just a guy from Reading, went to UMass Boston, joined the National Guard my sophomore year in college. They have a great program for anyone that's out there looking at how to pay for college, especially with the costs, 100% free tuition if you join the National Guard. Like a lot of folks, I did that. After graduating in 1984, I went on active duty and finished up in 2012 after a number of years. But I really had some unique opportunities during my time in the military to focus on a couple different careers. One aspect in particular that I got involved in back in the mid-'80s was counterterrorism. I became an instructor, went to a bunch of training in schools, and really caught my attention. And we kind of got to see what was going to happen. They all knew it was coming, they just didn't know when.
Right.
And then, peacetime Army, for most of my career. Desert Storm kind of came and went, and we thought that was that. And I was approaching 18 years of active duty when 9/11 hit, and I thought, wow, this is really changing, and it changes everybody's life. And then the rest was history from then on. multiple trips to Afghanistan and Iraq, and really visiting parts of the world that you never thought you'd see, and really gives you a much better appreciation for what we have back here, especially here in Massachusetts.
So in the 80s, you were studying counterterrorism, so to speak, probably never having any idea just how it would come to this.
It was someone else's problem, because the Army faced a lot of stuff over in Europe with a lot of groups like Red Army Faction, Red Brigade, and those types of organizations, so we had to prepare for that. And then, you know, the long shot eventuality if it came to the U.S.,
Right.
but it was highly unlikely. And so really the focus was on those type of things. But as we got into asymmetrical warfare in Bosnia, it started, you know, we had to start preparing for those stability security operations and transition from a conventional mindset towards these asymmetrical fights. And so timing was there, and you know, it's interesting because back then I was in the military police. I spent a number of years there before I switched to the armored cavalry, and so I had a kind of that law enforcement background with the combat arms training. That it didn't make sense to me that I was making these transitions in my career, because normally you have one, and it kind of came to pass when I was sitting on the side of a building in Fallujah, wondering how my career got me here. But I had trained in all those units, and I had all those units I was now commanding. So it kind of came full circle for me in Iraq back in 2003.
And you were the only Massachusetts native to have been appointed as general since World War II. Is that correct, too?
I believe so. That's what the historians told me. You know, right time, right place.
Right.
And you know, you go through your career. My goal was to become a lieutenant colonel and retire at 20, and I hit that after I came back from Iraq in 2004, and just didn't feel right about getting out.
Right. And so all that experience you brought back, and now you're executive director of Home Base. Can you tell us a little bit about the organization itself? We'll speak about the programs in a moment, but tell us what the mission of the organization is.
Sure. It really started with the inspiration from Tom Warner, one of the owners of the Red Sox, the chairman of the Red Sox. Tom visited Walter Reed after the 2007 World Series. In 2008, after a White House visit. His father was a Normandy veteran, and he saw what was going on in the world and the fact that the veterans needed some help. And so after his visit to Walter Reed, which was a 1-hour visit extended to 5 hours, he was committed. And he reached back to Ted Kennedy and asked him for a recommendation on what to do and what area to focus on. And they said the invisible wounds of war. The physical injuries, they felt that the VA and DOD had a pretty good handle on. And so he met with Peter Slavin, who's the president of Mass General. They had a long visit, and they discussed options. Mass General has the #1 department of psychiatry in America, and it also holds a relationship with Spaulding Rehab, which is one of the top 3 rehab hospitals in America for traumatic brain injury. And by the end of the conversation, Peter was committed, brought it back to the board, and it was a 100% vote to do it.
What year was that?
That was in 2009.
Wow.
They opened the doors in 2000. It was 2008. They opened the doors in 2009. And they committed the resources of both institutions to raise awareness, help raise the funds, and provide the care and fill a gap in care that wasn't currently being addressed with the VA.
That's great. That's great. Thank you for that. And Chairman, you get to see, you get to engage and interact with the local Veteran Services officers. Could you tell us a little bit about that system and how it impacts the lives of veterans across the state?
Sure, Sheriff. Every city and town in Massachusetts has to have a Veteran Service officer. Here in Newton, we have Seth By, who's an excellent Veteran Service officer who actually is president of the Veteran Service officers of the state of Massachusetts. But their role and our role interacting with them is to make sure primarily that a lot of these veterans don't understand or come forward when there's benefits that are available to them. And so they're constantly trying to reach out and assist veterans and their families and Gold Star families to what benefits are available to them and what they're entitled to. So that is a big, any other issue that comes in, that paperwork, they're there for them, these Veteran Service Agents offices across the state, so we want them to utilize them. We want the veterans to go to them for help when they need help.
Right. So it's their local, they go right down to City Hall or someplace in their own town, they have access to some folks that can help them out immediately.
Correct.
Well, and I want to bring it back because both of you were kind enough to come and visit the Middlesex Jail and House of Corrections. You got to see our housing unit for military veterans, or our Humvee. You know, we've seen the results of this program. I know that oftentimes you don't get to go inside of places of incarceration, especially for something like this, since it's such a unique program. Could you tell us how you think it fits with the overall service of veterans in Massachusetts and maybe across the nation? General, do you want to?
Sure. I was struck by the fact that you could see these gentlemen regain a sense of teamwork. They were all veterans. They all had served in the military, and you could see them working together, helping each other, supporting each other. The unit was amazing. I mean, they were all right in that one spot. They had everything there. But I thought the most important aspect was the fact that you're setting the conditions for them to be successful when they go home. A lot of times, you know, in traditional incarceration, you may not have the opportunities to really get after those issues as well as you do in that program. And you know, it's evident that you've got some magic there because it's working.
Right.
And it gives these guys the ability to regain their confidence, regain some self-respect, and the fact that they're working with their fellow veterans. They're going to work together once they leave.
Right. And they are actually, as I was just telling you, they've even started a network on the outside to lend them support once they get outside, which is something that usually in corrections you don't really want to have happen. Associations made on the inside to maintain on the outside. You don't really want that to happen necessarily. Here's a case where it works really well, and for all the right reasons, but because it goes back to their original service, which makes them who they are. And if you can appeal to that, allows you to bring greater benefit. Representative, you just visited more recently. I know you were, you seem pretty moved by what you saw in there. What are your impressions?
I was, Sheriff. It was a very, as you said, moving. I was really, another member of the legislature in our committee was able to attend Jim Marciero
from Westford. Yep.
And we had a great visit. We spent several hours at the jail, and being in this unit, it really did, as the General said, the support that they have of each other, not only each other, but of the staff at the Sheriff's Office and the Sheriff himself, the support they have, all just working together to try to get these people healthy and back on with their lives to be productive citizens. And that was really struck me, and I was very impressed, and I think that you'll see it'll be a model across the country. But kudos to your staff and you for getting a program like this going.
Thank you. You know, honestly, it's probably like when you started home base, General. It's something that people kind of knew was necessary, and yet no one had really started something like that. And you know, it's great to be first, but it's also a shame that you had to be the first at that time, because even years before, people knew.
Well, and again, when you look at it, it's such a common sense approach. You're tapping into guys that have made a commitment to the nation, that really have that national identity, that patriotic feeling, and you're able to re-spark that within them.
Right.
And again, their self-esteem, self-respect is an important part, and they want to keep that when they come out. And some of them, you know, got twisted on the road a little bit, and you got them back on the straight and narrow.
Right. That's right. I mean, if they took the oath, we're going to be there for them, and you know, whether they served overseas or not, you know, we're going to be there to protect them because they were willing to lay down their life for the rest of us. So
that's right.
So thank you, General. You run some really incredible programs at home base. Could you tell us a little bit about some of those that you're doing? Because I've been to a couple of presentations, very moving, very powerful. I mean, the gentleman that I heard speak, and I just saw him featured someplace else, he got very emotional when he was speaking. Do you know who I'm speaking about? It was at the Charlestown event.
Yep.
Could you tell us even a little bit about him?
Sure.
That was amazing.
So one of the challenges we have with folks returning home is they've got some transition issues. There's a lot of mental health injuries that can take place over in combat, as you can imagine. We've got some of our youngest members are in the most fierce combat. So if you take a look at your 18, 19-year-old sons and daughters, that's who I go to war with. Yeah, right. And it becomes apparent when I see them after they take off the body armor, after they take off the helmet, and they're in their T-shirt and shorts over in a tent in the middle of the desert.
They're just a kid.
It looks like a school bus just dropped them off. But that's the way life is. And you know, our World War II generation, there were 15 and 16-year-old guys that lied about their age. So it's young kids that aren't fully formed. Right. So we got a challenge ahead of us. So what Home Base did was try to find a gap in what was being provided at the VA, develop and access some of the best resources in the country. So we have a partnership with Harvard Mass General Hospital, so all our clinicians come from there. We've got the cachet of the Red Sox. We've been able to design programs that address the full spectrum of injuries. Sometimes it's a lighter touch, and then in some cases it's very complex. And folks that have post-traumatic stress disorder type injuries, they've seen their best friend cut in half. They've seen kids killed, some horrific, horrific stuff. The other end of the spectrum, you've got folks that were combat service support and support soldiers that could be dental hygienists, lawyers, finance specialists, but they still get shot at periodically, or the potential to get shot at is there like an invisible sword of Damocles every
Hanging
day
over their head, yeah.
for years. And now we've got a situation with 2, 3, 4 deployments, and most recently now, if you look at it, we're on our second generation. So 18-year-old paratroopers and Marines that are serving in Afghanistan, Iraq today were 2 years old when the war started. And since it's a family business, we've got these men and women that probably endured mom and dad deploying their whole childhood. So the effect on them is pretty profound. The real cornerstone, our key program we developed and started running last year was a 2-week intensive clinical program where we can bring veterans from anywhere in the country to Boston. We cover their airfare, lodging, meals, and all the care, and we can get a year of therapy compressed into 2 weeks. That's a big challenge for young people. Come in once a day for any type of care.
That's right.
You lose about 20% of your pay for the week.
Right.
So who can afford to lose 20% of their pay for 12 weeks? So
Right.
talk about a barrier to care.
Right.
You just can't afford to get it.
Right. Yeah, that was really impressive how you've been able to bring that down so that they could arrange with their employers, with their family responsibilities, they could arrange to do this. And I saw the results of these men and women returning to their families. You know, warriors that were warriors, like you would want them protecting you. But over here, the adjustment is so difficult, they just can't seem to find the right way to handle things.
There's so much survivor's guilt. There's cases where I made it back, my friends didn't.
Yeah.
And you're trying to process that. And I know we see that in law enforcement and first responders as well. It's a challenge. And I think the fact that our folks have spent the time to really understand the issues and then develop tailored programs for each veteran that comes through, much in the same way you guys are doing.
And Representative, can you tell us a little bit about some of the other programs that you see out there as well, like a home base? I mean, we cover all of Middlesex County with this Beyond the Badge. What else do you see out there that you see connecting with people to provide those sources? Or what are the new trends that you see out there?
Well, I had, once I was named chairman of the committee, I had the opportunity to go down and really learn about home base, because there are so many different programs out there, and then through certainly the veteran service agents, but Gold Star Family Network of families that really, you know, we were in the State House last week for our hearing. There's so many different groups, and that's been the real challenge of trying to figure out how many, you know, different groups and what they represent to different areas of the military, and they're all advocating in certain areas and trying to get them to work together for a common purpose that we're working on. And as I mentioned earlier, before we started filming, was one of the challenges we've faced as a committee is that we're seeing a lot of civil service of cities and towns opting out of civil service, and when that happens, police, fire, who had veterans preference, that's being lost. So we're trying to work with cities and towns to come up with a policy if they opt out of civil service, so that they would still have a veterans preference. So that's just another example of things that happen and go along the way that we still need to work on to figure out solutions to keep our veterans benefits where they are.
In general, I want to speak about a new sort of stage in what home base is doing, but you spoke a little bit about the young people that are coming back, and back in World War II, they were even younger, perhaps. They lied about their age. They were able to lie about their age. I hear oftentimes that there's a difference generationally between those that serve. Are you able to tell us a little bit about that, how that works? I mean, is it a matter of coping mechanisms, resiliency that maybe one generation had for various reasons and maybe another generation may or may not have, or have different types of coping mechanisms?
I think the men and women of World War II survived the Depression, and they fought through one of the most horrific wars in our nation's history. But I will tell you, a lot of the older veterans that I talk to will ask me the same question. Why are all these young kids coming down with post-traumatic stress like it's a flu? And so I'll look at them and I'll say to them, so you were in some heavy fighting in World War II? And they'll say, yep. I was in Iwo Jima, I was in Guadalcanal, and I'll ask them, well, how'd you sleep since the war? And how's your marriage? And they'll say, which one? And I haven't slept a night since the war. They had post-traumatic
they had it,
stress.
they
They just
yeah.
never got to it.
Right,
and,
right.
And what happens is when these guys come home, regardless of which war, they don't feel comfortable talking about it, not because it's a big secret, because they just don't want to stand out.
Right.
So if you said you had a hard day at work because this, and this, or I got a bad meal in a restaurant, they're thinking about the 3 weeks they didn't get a meal.
Right.
And the fact that their bad day was losing their best friend. And if
Right,
you say
right.
that, all of a sudden everybody in the room stops talking and
Yeah.
looks at you and you say, wow, why'd I do that?
Yeah, yeah.
And so they keep that buttoned up unless they're amongst themselves, because
Right.
they've got that shared background. And
Yeah.
I think policemen do the same thing.
Yeah.
I think firemen do something
Right.
similar. They don't talk about the fatals they see on the
And
highway.
I've heard that about military. You want to hear the stories, but then what you hear, it really causes tremendous awkwardness and anxiety,
Yeah.
and then the veteran that explained or opened up now feels even worse about it and refuses to do so in the future, and it causes this terrible spiral.
And they already feel a little out of place.
Right.
You can imagine, especially if you leave a place, pick a place in the world like Afghanistan or Iraq, Kandahar, Fallujah, Anbar. Everywhere you go, someone's trying to take a shot at you,
Right.
potentially going to roll a grenade in your vehicle.
Right.
So you're watching everybody, you trust no one.
Yeah, right.
And then you come back here, and it's business as usual,
Right.
blue skies, sunny days.
Right.
And everybody's got great food and everything else. So it takes
you
a
let
while
them
to
in?
make that transition
How
back.
you let them in?
And they keep a little guarded.
Well, that's actually, interestingly, that's sort of the transition of people that serve time in places of incarceration. You have to abide by the code inside. You become institutionalized even a bit, because you have to do that to protect yourselves. And when you get back out, it's not such an easy transition,
No.
and you can't immediately change to be what everyone else is like, and it causes you even more problems.
That's right.
And I know that home base is starting to focus on some work with Vietnam era veterans. And in our unit, we've had people from Vietnam, right through present day. Theaters of battle and those that didn't serve. Tell us a little bit about that generation and what you're doing with that especially that era veteran right now.
Sure. So when Home Base was first created, it was a post 9/11 program,
Right.
and the decision was made by my predecessor, the founding executive director, who was a Vietnam vet, and he was a doctor, and basically said it's triage. We have limited resources. We have to focus on the young guys first. But we made a decision in partnership with the Red Sox and MGH last spring. We made a public announcement at the July 15th, run to Home Base, and then the game that night.
Mm-hmm.
And we held this amazing pregame ceremony where we gave a welcome home to 1,400 Vietnam vets and some family members. They came in through the center field wall, and they got a 10-minute standing ovation while they all came out there. It was one of these Field of Dreams environments with the Gaelic column playing pipes and drums.
Right.
I got to tell you,
That is
there
heartwarming,
wasn't a
isn't
dry
it?
eye.
Yeah. This is for a cohort that was never welcomed back when they came back, and really never got the thanks even after that.
We had a 4-star general who lost his right leg in Vietnam that commanded all U.S. troops during Operation Desert Storm in 1990. Now, he's had the accolades. He's had the pats on the back. He had a ticker tape parade in New York, one in Washington, and he said, in 50 years, this was the first time he was ever welcomed or recognized for his Vietnam service.
Right.
And that's a national embarrassment,
Yeah.
tragedy.
Right.
And I think people have grown up and understand that regardless of their concerns back in the 60s and 70s, the soldiers had nothing to do with it. They went where they were told to do, and they did what they were told to do.
Right, right.
So they're treating them much better, and we'll welcome them in now with programs to treat them, and so we're open to all combat eras now.
That's great. That's great. Representative, could you tell us something? You've got a number of bills. You already spoke a little bit about some of the Gold Star Mother issues and some of the civil service. What other bills are kind of floating around in your committee right now that you could speak about?
So one is increasing the Gold Star benefit families. Right now it's at $2,000 a year. We're just trying to increase that to $2,500. That's one that's being considered. We're trying to put an omnibus bill together with the Senate for Veterans Day or Memorial Day. We're just still trying to figure that. One other popular one that we see with our seniors and we have for veterans is the property tax work-off. Increasing that for a voluntary, if a vet who's maybe not working and can use some property tax relief, that they can go to city and town and try to we're increasing. Right now it's at 1,000, and we're trying to increase that to 1,500 for each city and town for a vet. So those are some of the other things that are being considered right now.
And I imagine, because when I was in the legislature, I chaired the committee on health care, and some of those hearings were really emotional. I'm sure you get some really emotional hearings in there on some of the pieces of legislation you're overseeing with family members and those that have returned and children and things like that. Is it like that?
Certainly, and we're having in the next few weeks the Gold Star families in for another reception we do every year, and there is nothing more emotional than that.
Right.
And you know, meeting people last year, one woman lost 2 husbands. Was married young, husband went away, was killed, remarried, and her second husband was killed. Wow. So incredible stories that of people who are just resilient, and you know, and it's a great atmosphere. Certainly, they really connect with each other, and it's really heartwarming to see how much they support each other.
Right.
For they come from all over the state, and they have such a strong network. And it's people that we just really should recognize and support constantly, and we do. And so I think that's one of the heartwarming things about being on this committee.
And to know that you're impacting, when you're listening, they know that they're being heard by leaders of the state. That's going to be a great feeling for them too. General, I know that one of the features of home base is you don't only work with the veterans themselves, but you work with their families, because, you know, if someone comes back and they're not as healthy as you want them to be, they're not the only ones that suffer. Could you tell us a little bit about your work with families?
So if you can imagine what it's like if your son or daughter deployed and they were in harm's way, deaths at their door every day for a year, and then they come home and they're hurting. Any person that has a child with any kind of mental health injury, my wife will always say to me, you can only be as happy as your saddest child.
Yeah.
And when you know that they're potentially thinking of taking their life, there is nothing more scary than that as a parent. So home base treats a multi-generational approach. We treat the children of our warriors, their spouses, their brothers and sisters, and their parents.
Right.
It's a 3-generational model, because the parents white-knuckle these deployments, and a 19-year-old, 20-year-old kid comes home from war, he couch surfers. He's back in the home, and they can be disruptive.
Right. Right.
We've designed a special program for our Gold Stars that we just piloted in July. A 2-week program where we brought in 10 women from across the country that were in particularly tough shape because of, you know, losing their husband. In these cases, it was their husbands took their lives.
Right. Well, I've been telling you, this is really inspirational, and I really thank you both for your work. That's all the time we have for today's show. I want to thank my guests, Brigadier General Jack Hammond and Representative John Lawn, for your service in the State House. Thanks to all of you for joining us. I hope you'll tune in for future episodes. But until then, remember, life is full of choices. Please make good ones.
It's harder whenever there's a bigger group. Pretty much a good day for me would be people leaving their hands off of me. I'm always called names. Everywhere that I go, there's always someone calling me names, calling me gay. I've been choked, thrown up against a wall, punched. Nobody's ever tried to help me.
Hi, I'm your mediator.
I'm really glad we can be adults about this.
Checking your fantasy league?
Nah, just my 401k statement.
I can't seem to save anything.
I got a pizza for a Todd.
Hey, can somebody spot me?
When it comes to financial stability, don't get left behind. Get tools and tips for saving at feedthepig.org.